General stores were, and still are, staples in small communities. They have a great variety of goods and services available, from canned foods, eggs, to hardware, fabric, and clothing. General dealers were established in the 18th and 19th century in many remote, populated places where mobility was limited and a single shop was sufficient to serve the entire community. Due to its close connection and confinement to its customers, general dealers often adjusted their sales offerings to the specific preferences throughout their community. The oldest continually run general store in Canada is Trousdale's, located in Sydenham, Ontario, which has been operated by the Trousdale family since 1836. As urban centers took over, the number of general stores decreased. Transportation also became more widespread, with automobiles and trains, so people could go further to get items. General stores grew into local grocery stores, and that in turn evolved into big supermarkets. A local example of a general store is that of Cockshut's Dry Goods, which was located at the corner of Colborne Street and Market. James Cockshut came to Toronto from England in 1827 and opened a general store there. In 1829, he decided to try and open a branch in Brantford and sent his 17-year-old son Ignatius to assist in the opening. This venture was short, but Ignatius was confident that he could make things work, and a second attempt at a store in Brantford was opened in 1832, with 20-year-old Ignatius as the manager. This was the first of many successes for Ignatius Cockshut within Brantford, but those are stories for another time. The general store was respected in the community, and you were lucky if you got a job there. General stores were often training grounds for up-and-coming businessmen in towns. It was also a financial institution for the community. They often offered credit to customers, or you could also pay with something like a bartering system. They developed a variety of ways to make money, not only that of the staples like food or tools, but also through housing the post office or the community's first telephone. And the following are some examples of items that would have been available at general stores, and some that you might even recognize. Our first item is Ann Page Peanut Butter. Now, this was a product line within the store A&P. The Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company started in 1859 in the United States. A&P was one of the first chain grocery retailers at the turn of the 20th century. Before, grocery stores were small, regional players and usually focused on one area, typically dry goods. Butchers and greengrocers were separate entities, but clustered together for convenience sake. And A&P was the first to operate 100 stores in 1881. Chain retailers exploded in the 1920s, and former small regions started covering larger and larger areas. The 1930s and 1940s saw the development of supermarkets, as they were called, where grocers were consolidating fresh meats, produce, and dry goods all under one roof. And in 2005, A&P was sold to Metro. Next up are some of our Quaker cans. Now, the story behind canning as a practice is actually an interesting one. In 1795, Napoleon offered 12,000 francs to anyone who could figure out a way to better preserve food. The Franco-Prussian War was raging, and as the Russian forces retreated, they used a scorched earth policy, leaving no food. The French army suffered greatly from starvation and malnutrition, more so than they did enemy fire. Nicholas Appert took the challenge and won the money. In 1809, he observed that food cooked inside a sealed glass jar did not spoil unless the seals leaked, and he developed a method of sealing food in glass jars. and he was awarded the prize money a year later in 1810. The reason for the lack of spoilage was unknown at the time, since it would be another 50 years before Louis Pasteur, of the milk pasteurization process, demonstrated the role of microbes in food spoilage. And looking at our can of tomatoes, the capital of tomato growing in Canada is Leamington, Ontario. There's very good soil and weather there to grow tomatoes, and in 1908, the town gave land to the H.J. Heinz Company, and they established a food processing plant there in 1909. The area developed a greenhouse industry, thus extending the life of tomatoes for growing. And in 1959, Leamington was the source of 2/3 of the tomatoes produced in Canada. Next up is our enamelware. Now, enamelware consists of baked enamel over metal. In addition to dishes, there were all sorts of uses for it. It was discovered to be good for signs, as it helped to make the sign last longer. And typically enamelware was used for advertising and street signage in the period between 1880 and 1950. Benjamin Bow created the first all-purpose factory for making such signs in Selly Oak in 1889 and called it the Patent Enamel Company. The technique of porcelain enameling on cast iron was developed in Central Europe in the early 1800s. And by the later years of that century, the blue-spotted agateware became popular. In the 1890s, agateware, which was enameled nickel and steel, was marketed as a sanitary alternative to kitchenware that used lead and arsenic in its production. Graniteware mimicked the look of granite. This was developed by Charles Stumer and produced by the St. Louis Stamping Company. It was originally called granite ironware. The term graniteware eventually became a generic term for the speckled gray and white enamelware. Brantford has had a series of soda water, or pop, works since the 1860s. Prior to the Owens automatic bottle-making machine appearing in Ontario around 1906, most bottles were blown into a mold and the neck was applied by hand in a second step in the glass-making works. Most flavors were bottled in a clear or aqua glass, but green glass would be used for ginger ale and brown glass for ginger beer, this was due to the fact that products made with ginger would spoil in the sunlight. In 1911, Clayton J. Howell, president and founder of the Orange Crush Company, partnered with Neil Ward and incorporated the company. And it was Ward that made the recipe for Orange Crush. Now, Howell was not new to the soft drink business, having earlier introduced Howell's Orange Julep. Soft drinks of the time often carried the surname of the inventor along with the product name. Howell sold the rights to use his name in conjunction with his first brand, therefore, Ward was given the honors. Crush was premiered first as Ward's Orange Crush. Now, originally, Orange Crush included orange pulp in the bottles, giving it a, quote, fresh squeezed, unquote, illusion, even though the pulp was added rather than remaining from the squeezed oranges. And this orange pulp has not been seen in the bottles for decades. It was later purchased by Procter & Gamble in 1980, with the exception of the Canadian rights, which were purchased in 1984. Procter & Gamble only manufactured a bottler's base, which was a concentrate consisting of flavor and color. Next up are some honey cans from some local apiaries. Due to the definition of an apiary as being a location where hives are kept, its history can be traced as far back as that of beekeeping itself. and lots of local farmers kept honeybees as they were easy to care for and complemented other produce. Keen's mustard has a history extending back to the 18th century. The first mustard factory in London was opened by Mr. Keen and Sons at Garlick Hill in 1742. Thomas Keen was born in Camberwell, South London, in 1801, but the family subsequently moved to Croydon in Surrey and ran a 311-acre Welcomes farm at a nearby Colston. Now, in the 1930s, the Keen's Mustard Club was created. Members received a Mustard Club badge in the shape of a mustard pot and a booklet entitled, quote, Inner Secrets of the Mustard Club, unquote. In 1995, Unilever purchased the food side of Reckitt and Coleman. And this organization kept the Coleman part of its name and continued to make mustard, the American mass mustard called French's. Outside of the UK, in places such as Canada and Australia, Coleman still sells its mustard under the Keen's name. In 1998, Keen's mustard was bought out by McCormick Foods Australia, and Keen's asked Australians to search their homes for nostalgic Keen's memorabilia. The search uncovered historic advertisements and even an original mustard powder tin dating back to 1904. In 2000, Keen's Mustard took the memorabilia on tour to share with the rest of Australia. Our next object is magic baking powder. And baking powder is a dry chemical leavening agent, a mixture of a carbonate or bicarbonate and a weak acid. And baking powder is used to increase the volume and lighten the texture of different baked goods. It works by releasing carbon dioxide gas into a batter or dough through an acid-base reaction, causing bubbles in the wet mixture to expand, and thus leavening the mixture. And the first single-acting baking powder was developed by a Birmingham-based food manufacturer named Alfred Bird in England in 1843. The first double-acting baking powder was developed by an Eben Norton Horsford in the United States in the 1860s. And magic baking powder was first sold in Canada in 1897 by the E.W. Gillett Company, and later by Standard Brands, which is now owned by Kraft. And as you can see, the label hasn't changed much over the years, but the tin itself is now plastic. Introduced first in 1892 by a wholesale grocer named Joel Owsley Cheek, Maxwell House was named in honor of the now-defunct Maxwell House Hotel in Nashville, Tennessee. And this hotel was its first major customer. For nearly 100 years, until the late 1980s, this was the highest-selling coffee brand in the United States. Now, the rubber boots that you see here were made by B.F. Goodrich. Yes, the tire company. Canvas shoes were remarkably popular in the more casual 1970s and 1980s, when Nike, Adidas, Puma, and Reebok made tennis shoes stylish. The B.F. Goodrich rubber shoes were some of the great tire rubber company shoe brands. But they weren't the only ones. In fact, in the consumer's mind, there was a vast difference between sneakers and tennis shoes, and regular shoes. Regular shoes were about style only, but sneakers were about style and performance, which hooked in with the tire company brand heritage. William Scarfe purchased an interest in a Windsor, Ontario varnish works in 1877 and moved the company to Victoria Street in Brantford the following year. The company relocated to Greenwich Street in 1885. Products included shellacs and paints. Mr. Scarfe, who also served as Brantford's mayor in 1884 and 1885, before resigning to become the Brant County Sheriff in October 1885, passed away in April of 1891. Management of the company was taken over in 1898 by Reginald and Gordon Scarfe. The plant on Greenwich Street was closed on June 1st, 1977, when the business was moved to a newer building at 10 Craig Street. And the company was closed in December 1996 when it was decided that the factory was too small to be productive. And here you see some bottles of Watkins flavorings. Now, the company was founded by J.R. Watkins in Plainview, Minnesota, and he began selling liniment in 1868 door to door in the southeastern part of the state. Molded into the glass bottle, about 1/3 of the way down, was a mark which showed how much of the product a consumer could use and still get a refund. A label with the statement, quote, "If not fully satisfied, your money cheerfully refunded," unquote, also appeared on the bottle. The Watkins trial mark is believed to be the first money-back guarantee in the United States. The company moved to Winona in 1985 and added a number of products to its lineup. Baking materials included pepper and vanilla extract were added in 1895, along with cinnamon, ginger, cloves, peppermint extract, and lemon extract. During World War II, Watkins devoted 90% of its production capacity to support the Allied war effort. To fill government contracts, Watkins produced dried eggs, powdered juice packets, vitamin tablets, hospital germicide, DDT, and insecticide powder in support of the war effort. Now here you see a McCormick's soda tin, and Thomas McCormick was born on the 1st of July, 1830, in Donegal, Northern Ireland. He married Catherine Armstrong, and they had 7 sons and 5 daughters. McCormick immigrated from Ireland around 1849 and settled briefly in Buffalo, where he met his future wife, and then moved on in the early 1850s to London, where he worked for several years as a grocery clerk. In 1858, he began manufacturing confectionery, primarily hard candy, on a small scale for local wholesale distribution. McCormick was a cautious entrepreneur who gradually built up his trade, relying upon modest profits for growth and taking care not to overextend himself with creditors. By the end of the 1870s, he had extended his trade throughout southwestern Ontario and was again in sole charge of the operation, which had been incorporated as the McCormick Manufacturing Company Limited in July of 1879. McCormick became one of the first Canadian manufacturers of food products to adopt a unit packaging for retail sales, when in 1880 he began distributing his soda biscuits in 3-pound paperboard boxes. In the 1890s, he had adopted another marketing technique, the use of trade names and trademarks. He began distributing Jersey Cream sodas, a premium product so named to differentiate it from his standard goods, but also to form a link with the consumer, who was expected to recognize its superior qualities and remain loyal to the brand. McCormick died on the 6th of June, 1906 in Newton, Kansas, and was buried in London, Ontario. And there we have it, a short history of the General Store. Join us again in 2 weeks' time as we continue the story of the Good family with What a Good Life, Part 2, Myrtleville's Next Generation, from 1890 to 1967.